Good morning, everyone.
Morning. We're good to go? Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. We'll probably have a few folks joining us as we go through our webinar this morning. Very, very excited to welcome you to our second session, Excellence in Professional Practice. And today we have Dr. Jason Rogers, who will be formally introduced in a while, joining us from Rundle College Society. So with that, we'll dig right in, please, Claudine. Okay, so in terms of the land acknowledgement, I would like to go through the land acknowledgement at this point. We acknowledge that we are on traditional treaty territory, gathering grounds, meeting place, and traveling route of the Treaty 6 First Nations, Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Nations. Treaty 7 First Nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy and of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani Nations. Stoney Nakota Nation of Chiniki, Bearpaw, and Stoney Nations, and the Satini Nation. Treaty 8 First Nations of the Cree, Dene, Ta, Enza, and the Denzaleen Nations, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of the past, whose footsteps have shaped this land, and those of the present and future will continue to shape it for centuries to come. We're committed to restoring and honoring the truth and reconciliation calls to action, and we strongly believe that truth must be acknowledged to move forward to reconciliation. Engaging in respectful, responsible, and reciprocal relationships with our First Nations and Métis communities is the path forward to reconciliation. Together, we call upon our collective communities to build a stronger understanding and relationship of all peoples who dwell on this land we call home. Claudine, may I have you go back one slide? And I'll just introduce myself. I think everyone knows me. I'm Colleen Cimarosa-Watt and CAS consultant if you're joining us for the first time. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to John Waterhouse, who currently serves as the ERLC Executive Director, and he will be co-hosting with me today. And John, I'll let you introduce our guest speaker.
Thanks very much. Dr. Rogers is the head of school at the Rundle College Society. It's an innovative K-12 independent academic co-educational day school in Calgary with approximately 1,200 students. It thrives under Jason's leadership, fostering inspired minds and unparalleled character across the campuses, including a unique virtual campus for complex learners. Dr. Jason Rogers is a transformative leader who consistently elevates educational experiences through his expertise, creativity, and dedication. His passion for fostering academic excellence, coupled with the ability to inspire and connect with students, staff, and the broader community, make him an exceptionally innovative and compassionate head of school. Welcome to today, Dr. Jason Rogers.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. We also, just quickly, if you wouldn't mind, we're a small group, so if you wouldn't mind unmuting your mic and just telling us where you're at and what your role is, that would be great. It'll give us a little idea of who we're working with today, who's in the room.
I can start. Shauna Warren, Superintendent, Sturgeon Public Schools, and I did participate in the first session, and I'm very excited for today.
My name is Reagan Weeks. I am the superintendent of Prairie Rose Public Schools, and I too had the opportunity to participate in the last session, and I am looking forward to hearing from Dr. Rogers.
Good morning, I can jump in. I'm Crystal Lothian. I'm the Director of Support Services for Holy Spirit Catholic Schools down south in Lethbridge, Alberta, and super excited to be here this morning.
Hi, it's Wes Oginski. I'm superintendent at Holden Rundle Academy. We're east of Edmonton, over a little over 100 kilometers, and this is my first session in this series.
Lori put a chat. She doesn't have audio.
Yeah, well, good morning. Sorry about that.
And I believe Boyd just joined us too. Hi, Boyd. We're just doing introductions. It's your turn.
Got an audio issue too.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sure. I just had a parent on the phone. Sorry, you guys. Boyd Craven, Assistant Superintendent for Prairie Rose School Division.
Morning, Boyd. We know about those last minute calls. David, it would be a pleasure to hear from you as well.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm David Keohan. I'm CEO of the College of Alberta School Superintendents, and thanks everyone for being here. And I'm really really interested and excited about hearing the Rundle College story. Welcome, Jason.
Miss anyone, Claudine? Missed you. Who are you, Missy?
Claudine Cortez, Executive Assistant CAS.
Claudine will be helping us with any technical. Let's dig right in, ladies and gentlemen, and have a look at the question in for the chat today. Jason and I, when we were planning this, thought let's just get an overview of what you deem the role of system education leaders in implementing Alberta's professional practice standards. What's the role? Feel free to unmute your mic or put your answer in the chat. Modeling the standard. Framework, systems in place for implementation. Yeah, providing and guiding leadership opportunities. Finding opportunities to optimize student learning, creating contexts and learning environments in which the standards flourish. Well, we're hoping to contribute to that today, aren't we, Jason and John, in terms of helping you to support those elements of your role and hopefully the standards flourish across the province of Alberta. Okay, Claudine, if we could hit the next one, that would be great. Today, we're going to spend some time on 4 areas. We'll talk very briefly about the 4 university research study on professional practice standards, which is the foundation for these particular webinars. We will look at the illustrative case study from Rundle College Society and Dr. Rogers. We'll have conversations with our colleagues, and then we hope to have you have some time to do some reflection and evaluation. With the study, you'll see that there were 4 universities involved: University of Calgary, University of Alberta, Concordia, and Lethbridge. And they were looking at assessing and deepening and looking at the implementation of practice for the last 4 years across the province of Alberta, relative to all 3 standards, that being the leadership quality standard, the teaching quality standard, and the superintendent leadership quality standard. And if you have any questions around this report, we've included Dr. Sharon Friesen as the principal investigator, and she's very responsive to any questions you might have, or should you want to use any data out of that particular study. Claudia, if we could. So in terms of the study and the comprehensiveness of the study, you can see on the right side of your screen all of the elements that have occurred over the last 4 years. And we've circled the 10 case studies. So Rundle College Society will be bringing us their case study or an overview of their case study today. And can you please hit the next one, Claudine? This is where we'll be segueing to your slides, Jason. So welcome and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colleen, and thank you to Cass for this opportunity. David, John, Claudine, thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak with everybody. It's my pleasure and honor. Honestly, I'm feeling a huge dose of imposter syndrome sitting in this Zoom room amongst all of you. I have a lot of respect and admiration for the work that you do at the system leadership level, and I feel like I'm just a very, very small system leader here. So it's a real pleasure to be able to present to you. So I'll just do just a bit of a quick introduction and background as to myself and Rundle College, and then we're going to talk about a few of the things that were studied as part of this research. Happy to pause at any point, take any questions at all about Rundle, about the research, about some things we did to help implement in particular the LQS and the TQS here at the school starting in 2018. First of all, just a little bit about myself. I'm a prairie kid. I'm not, I'm from Southeast Saskatchewan. My parents are both public school educators. They worked in the public system for 35 years each and brought me up in the public system as well. And I taught in Saskatoon Public School Division as my first educational placement. I've got dyslexia, so reading doesn't come easily to me, never has. And I've got deep, deep empathy for those who have learning struggles. So my first and biggest passion is special education. You'll see that come out in a little bit here. And I've been fortunate enough to move to Alberta, stumbled into the private system. Honestly, I didn't know private system at all. Coming from Saskatchewan, there's I think 2 private schools in the entire province there. I was desperate and looking for a job, and there's no public system offering me work. So I started here in the year 2000 as a teacher in a school that I knew nothing about, which was specializing in kids with learning disabilities, which turned out to be just a perfect fit for me. And I've been at this school for 23 years now. It's hard to believe, but that's been the journey. So it's been pretty exciting that whole way. I've been fortunate to be administrator in Rundle Schools since 2005, and in 2014, I took on the headship for the school. For some people, the head of school is a strange role. Don't really know what it means, and it's not exactly Dumbledore from Harry Potter. Not nearly that magical or exciting, but I would say it's just a mini superintendent. By no means do I deal with the gravity of work that each of you deal with, but I do oversee the business and the educational operations here. We have about a $30 million budget. As mentioned before, about 1,200 students, about 200 staff, several plants spread across the city of Calgary facilities, as well as one in the cloud, which I'll talk about here momentarily. So if you have any questions about the structure, about independent schools, any of these things, I'm happy to pause and have that dialogue as well. So by all means, just put up your hand. Happy to talk about anything I'm sharing here. So Rundle's unique, I think, even in the private school landscape. We have 3 distinct programs. So we have one school called Rundle College. This is a kindergarten to grade 12 school that's academically focused. I would say mostly for traditional learners, and as university prep would be the kind of best way you'd typify it. It's a uniform. All these are uniform schools. You'll probably know that. Small class size is really the center of the work that we do here. There's an awful lot more that goes into that, but it was started in 1985. So we're almost 40 years old. Started by 2 gentlemen, Drs. Collette and Conklin. Dr. Collette was a minister of the United Church and also president of Mount Royal College at the time. And Dr. Conklin was a professor at the University of Calgary studying educational psychology. And the 2 of them put their heads together and decided to remortgage their homes and start this little school called Rundle College with 16 students first enrolled in the first year. And then it just grew from there, I suppose. In 1999, there was a new program brought on. I came onto this program just 1 or 2 years after it started, called Rundle Academy. It's a grade 4 to 12 program this is a specialized program for students with learning disabilities. So every student here has a diagnosed learning disability. And we all know the definitions, but I'll just put it out there: average to above average intelligence, but they struggle in one or more areas of learning. Could be anything from dysgraphia to dyscalculia to working memory or processing speed concerns. And so neat thing about this program is it is academically motivated as well. We see 100% of the students graduate, and we see 95% of them into post-secondary learning opportunity of their choice. So pretty remarkable results on a student by student basis there, but we're most proud of is a culture that's built inside this school, a culture of like pride and uniqueness and ownership of their own learning. And we, you know, it's been pretty special given my background to be able to work in that program for as long as I have. And the third program that Rundle oversees is one called Rundle Studio. This is a virtualized school for complex learners, for the neurally diverse, so even broader than learning disabilities. We reach students from across Canada inside this program. There are about 6 components to the program. You know, we've got synchronous, we have asynchronous, we've got a metaverse component. We've got co-curriculars, we've got volunteer opportunities, and we've got sports teams. Really, the idea is here, we've built a real school in the cloud. I'd love to talk about it more if people want to chat about it, but really we want to build that whole environment. Kids have recess together, they have assemblies, they go on field trips. These kids have been to Ottawa together on a field trip. And it's really to empower students with neural diversity. I mean, we have one student in this program that's legally deaf and blind. We have other students who have severe anxiety, depression. We have other students who, you know, are professional bull riders who have a learning disability, who can't be in one place all the time as they're traveling all over North America, but they're still a part of this program. So incredibly diverse population of students, but we're trying to build a real community inside the school. Like I said, a real school in the cloud is what Rundle Studio could be described as. And so Rundle Academy is not Rundle Studio, but the DNA comes across. We live and die by universal design for learning. We want to create accessibility for all students everywhere, all the time, ubiquitous without any kind of disruption. Beyond that, we want to build, you know, students who are aware of their own needs and are able to advocate for themselves. And those are real core tenets of the program. And you see students walking out of the academy in the studio saying, hey, listen, I've got a learning disability. These are the accommodations I need. How can I get those accommodations? What will be supporting me? And that, as we all know, that ownership is really, really important as these students go on to post-secondary learning opportunities of their choice. And so pretty proud of that program, pretty proud of those students. And so it's a lot about me and those schools. But I hope that was helpful and bring some insight into some of the work we're doing here over at Rundle. I was very fortunate to do my doctoral work under a professor named Dr. Barbara Brown, and Sharon Friesen was actually on my supervisory committee over the last 4 years. So I did that throughout COVID and really enjoyed the work. Got to know Sharon and Barb quite well during that time, and also others like Jim Brandon, for instance, who was a part of this research and since passed away. And so he was a true mentor and friend, I would say. And so as I did my doctoral work, I would say that some of that influenced the implementation of the TQS and LQS. I think invariably when you spend that much time on anything, it's going to infiltrate almost everything you do. So if you'll entertain it, I'm going to spend the next 2 to 3 minutes going through 4 to 5 years of work. And this is really the outcomes of some of the doctoral research that I conducted. The first is this idea of leadership practice of founding school leaders and what they did to successfully take independent schools from across Canada from startup to sustainability was the work that I focused on. Inside my conceptual model are these 4 pillars, and they're not mine. These ones are actually from Leithwood. Almost directly. And if you haven't picked up the Leithwood and Son work around domains of practice for school leaders, it's really, really worthwhile. It's so foundational to what school leaders do and how they impact change. So they found that there were 4 things that, and they validated this in 2008, then again, 2018. There were 4 practices which effective school leaders universally chose to use. And it almost reminds you of some of the Hattie work, honestly, but it's like set direction. So embodying visionary leadership. Voila, it actually lines up pretty closely with some of the LQS. Improve the instructional program. You can see roots of this throughout. Build relationship and develop people. And then the fourth one in there is develop the organization to support desired practices. So this certainly was the center of my conceptual model, nested inside some of the other findings. The next slide is actually the one that I find most interesting. So as I was developing my theories around what did these leaders do to bring their schools from startup to sustainability, they all followed a similar path. And so this is school startup. I know it's not particularly applicable to all of you in the room or even myself for that matter. But when we think about change management, I think it's very applicable. And I think a lot of the work that we do, well, at least that I do, and I presume that you do, is in the space of change management. Each of the leaders I studied followed these leadership theories in this order, which I thought was one of the big takeaways from my work. So first of all, deeply understanding visionary leadership and setting that direction. There's multiple layers to this idea of visionary leadership. How do you set the stage? How do you describe it? How do you work? How do you create the narrative around it? They all moved from visionary to servant leadership. So they walk the walk in a big way. Some of them did this for 5 to 7 years. Others did it for 5 to 7 months, but they all proved that it could be done by practicing it themselves. So that's, in a startup of a school, you can imagine what this looks like. It is teaching classes, it's finding facilities, it's setting up classrooms, it's all of those things, every competency that every department in a school would do, the school leader actually did before they hired for it, which is a attestation to their commitment to the program. And then a real keen eye to distributing that leadership in an effective way. And so we followed that through, and it seemed to be in all of the cases that I researched. So there you have it. Again, that's a lot of work or a lot of years in a very short amount of time sharing it out, but I hope that that's helpful. Now, as I don't know, I know what it was, having worked with Barb and Sharon and being in the middle of my doctoral work, I think I felt an obligation as a school leader to really think deeply about the implementation of the TQS and the SLQS, TQS and LQS in particular, and come up with some way of implementing them to the highest effect. And so I knew as part of the study, knew we'd be looking at, knew there'd be a case study done. So let's do our very best in implementing it. So I thought about it in these 3 buckets. So first of all is, how do I meaningfully bring awareness to our entire program around what the province is implementing here in the area of LQS? Taking it from information, so what information we need to pass along, and into action. And I think, if you can put the dots together, I don't think they're too far apart. This does start to look like, visionary leadership, followed by servant leadership, and then action. I'm going to explain that just a little bit further in the next couple of slides as to how we actually tactically took these on over a series of years, 2018 to 2022. The work really did never stop in here, but we did follow this path throughout that we set fairly early on in the process. So let's just jump right into a few of the tactical pieces here. So awareness, knowing that this was old but new information, we need to bring it to our faculty, to our staff, to our leadership team. Oh, I forgot to mention, my senior leadership team has 6 principals, 1 assistant head, and myself on it. And generally that was the implementation team of LQS and TQS from the senior level. So here you have it, presenting on the research. So Alberta Education did a phenomenal job, I thought, of implementing the LQS and providing a great syllabus of references. I had the benefit of doing research at the time, so I had access to University of Calgary Library digital stacks. And so would pull down articles and we'd present to each other on the relevant articles. And example of that would be some of the Leithwood work was in there. On the principal and director meeting agendas, there are items based on the research. So getting it to the origin story from the province's perspective, at least, and talking about it at those meetings, setting aside time. I can only imagine how busy your meetings are and how item intensive they are, but setting aside and protecting this time to talk about research that was directly in line with the standards that we're putting in, I found to be really helpful in the information stage of this. Concerted effort to align language. So we went it's nice. I guess it's a really nice thing about being small and a little bit nimble is we're able to go right back to our principal evaluation forms and directly align the language with what was inside the leadership quality standard. I'll show a couple examples of that in the slides to come. But I do find that language does matter. If you're speaking about something specific, you've got to be specific in the language you use, and that was important to us. Encouraging everybody to take it from our boardroom into their classroom and back to the boardroom. So how do you contextualize each of these inside your practice with your teams and deepening the conversation as the year progressed in those? So systematically taking it from the research to context and making it personal for each of the principals we were working with. And then ultimately, we want to be sharing it publicly as we could, people not knowing that we're talking directly to the LQS or the TQS, but what is the language that we're using when we're meeting with our parents in the presentation evenings. We have a lot of open houses, a lot of meet the teacher nights, a lot of opportunities to talk to our community. We have a weekly update that comes from principals, which is half visionary and philosophical and half tactical. So in the philosophical side of that, we want principals to be using the language that's embedded in the LQS. We needed to start right away building strategic partnerships. We didn't have these prior to this, and I think the standard around FNMI really did, force us to think more broadly in the space of pluralism, and I think that's been really, really beneficial. But we knew right away that we didn't have the in-house expertise to do this work, so to build really good partnerships, and I'm proud of the partnerships we continue to have. Some of them are now 5 and 6 years old. One of the most profound things Elder Starlight shared with us, I think, was in the very first meeting we had, was he said, listen, not for us, without us. And that was in the very first, we sat with him for 3 or 4 hours as a senior leadership team, no agenda, just talking in a circle. And I don't know how it came up. I wish I knew the origin story, but he said, not for us, without us, just makes that promise. And we've lived by that. And I can think of countless examples where we had a great idea that would address the FNMI standard. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we're going to do. And then we almost charged into it blindly and did it. But then somebody always comes back to that statement, not for us, without us. And then we give our partners a call and ask for advice and think about how we're going to implement that. So it's been a huge learning in that space. And then further to that, we had the great benefit of being in a strategic planning, early in a strategic planning process, and identifying 3 pillars that we thought not only addressed the LQS, for instance, but also address our school strategic needs. And those are innovation, wellness, and pluralism. You're going to see how those pull back into the work that we did over these 5 years. So these are just a couple quick screenshots showing, we create a definition of leadership at Rundle. Quality leadership is deeply embedded in this, obviously starting with the leadership quality standard, and then all the way through. This was co-created with our senior leadership team, always with the view that we would be rooting it in the leadership quality standard. I believe so then, like I said, straight down to leadership evaluation. Again, from the very onset, the LQS was the top standard in there, and we built it entirely around that as well. Okay. And gives you an example, like fostering effective relationships, one of the key pillars in the principal evaluation process or leadership evaluation as well. Next up, just moving into the information part. And honestly, that's probably the next bit, probably pushed the needle farther than anything else we did. And we continue to do this. And I think this has been a really big learning, is we have a leadership program here for students called the Ascent. Obviously, lots of mountain metaphors going on, given that we're named after a mountain. But, and we want every student to be a leader here. They don't have to be a prefect or student services leader. Every student leads. And so we want all students to learn about leadership. The Ascent is a program I've been developing since 2017 here, but naturally in about 2019, we thought, you know, why are we doing this just for students? We got to do this for staff and faculty and everybody who works here. So what does that look like? It looks like a teacher leadership program. And, you know, it's kind of like that lunch and learn format that we're all so familiar with. But I think the twist on this is our senior leaders now started to step up and present in the area of the leadership quality standard to staff. The real bait in all of this, if you will, is like, why would staff show up? There's twofold. One, it was part of our greater leadership development process, which we had a number of steps and processes to move into that kind of, you know, principal or assistant principal pool. But also it gave them unfettered access to the most senior leaders, myself included, in town hall type of conversations where it was just gloves off, let's talk about this topic, no questions, bad questions. So some of the topics that were presented over the course of 3 years in these sessions, and they're well attended. So we'd have 10% of our staff attending these. You know, average attendance was around 20 participants. So the power of relationship faculty, instructional leadership, what is it? Those principals or myself or the assistant head would be presenting on the topics I'm most comfortable presenting on, but the bulk of the presentation was Q&A. That was what's our PD focus and why? So instructional leadership and why is really the question, ways of knowing inside and outside the classroom, right back to the FNMI standard, and what is pluralism? You know, that's really where we started, where everybody belongs is really our definition of pluralism, which I think is quite an empowering statement and has really taken hold here and created lots of opportunities. And what does the director of ... do, right? I think there's a lot of questions as to what is a day in, day out of directors in our school and how do they spend their time? And we've got human resources, advancement, technology, finance, just like I presume many of your offices have. And those folks sat up and said, this is exactly what we do on the operational business side of it. So it just gives you a quick snapshot of what leadership development looked like, you know, and what we want for each of our staff. So accept ownership for minimum of one program in the character co-curricular strands of Rundle's Pathway of Success, and engage in local PD. And this was what our principals took forward to our staff, and then had those conversations with our staff about, are you following this pathway? If we really believe that everybody leads here at Rundle, then leadership development is important. Okay, and yeah, just simple stuff. So this would be one. Embodying visionary leadership was one of the sessions we did. I led this one. Simple Google form going out, and then we'd have host after school. Thank you, COVID, on Zoom, and it worked out pretty well that way. Okay, last but not least, coming home here is the action part of this. So here's how we distributed the leadership. We introduced coordinators in each of the areas of the values, so pluralism, wellness, and innovation. And we're very, very clear with them. And the 3-year plan for them looked exactly like this. We wanted them to see and hear. So I used a body metaphor, which I use quite often actually in leadership groups, is like, your first year is just using your eyes and your ears. That's all we're gonna do. And these new leaders who'd been through our leadership process development really took it to heart, and they just watched and listened for a full year. Next, we said, use your hands and feet. So get a little bit messy, move around, walk in the shoes, so on and so forth. You can start to develop projects, develop, you know, pilots, see how things work. And last but not least is developing hearts and minds. So you want to build that vision, you want to instill it in the people who are going to follow you and get to their hearts and minds. So it's about your heart mind, it's about their heart mind, but it's actually in the 3rd year where you start to really implement meaningful change in your areas. And these coordinators have done an incredible job of following that path, and certainly have implemented change effectively as a result. So Colleen, I think that's a wrap on my slides. I'm happy, I've been talking for about 30 minutes. I'm happy to pause, take questions on any or all of that, and pass it back over to you. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I think that let's open the floor to questions. If you have any burning questions that have come up as you've been listening to Jason's case study, covered a tremendous amount of information in that time, so thanks so much. Any questions before we go into the planned discussion? Okay, well, let's segue right into our group question around capacity building. So as Jason and I spent some time talking about the intersection of this illustrative case study and your work, we were interested in what capacity building initiatives have been put in place to support the implementation of professional practice standards at Rundle College that you'd like to unpack and consider implementing in your district, or even just exploring. Is there anything that stood out for you as he talked about the 3 circles? John?
Yeah, Jason, I've got just a couple questions. Can you tell us the number of staff you have?
209 staff.
Okay, appreciate that. So again, I really appreciate your presentation, very well developed. So one of the questions would be, with all of the efforts you've done, is how have you assessed the depth, I guess, of the TQS especially, but even the LQS being implemented or embodied by the professionals in your organization?
So I think that's a really good question. And I like the simple answer is being a part of a study like this one really allowed us to assess that. I mean, we got a lot of great data back from the interviews and the surveys that were done by the research team, which every year we annually reviewed as a senior leadership team, just to see where we were on the path. And sometimes we're very, very surprised. We thought that we'd made very, very good strides in FNMI space. And if you were to ask any of us on the senior leadership team prior to seeing the results, we'd say, that probably is one of our stronger pillars, just because of resources and time and energy we put into it. But consistently, even to the last iteration of this, that was our weakest pillar. So it was nice to be able to objectively look at that and understand that we weren't where we thought we were, and have that lens back. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as we look at our posting, so for instance, how many internal leaders are we getting applying for internal postings? And we have 1 to 2 leadership positions open up, whether it's department heads or you name it. There's a lot of leadership here in our school. How many internal postings are we getting, and what's the trend look like in the human resources? Like, how do teachers view themselves in the space of leadership, school leadership? And that's been really positive. We're seeing a lot of those. And the third one is something I struggle with sometimes, but seeing how many of our teachers or leaders are leaving our program to go on to lead other programs, and owning that leadership. And we've seen lots. Like, that's been a real trend where there's just simply not enough leadership here in this small system for them. And we see them moving into public charter and private systems and taking fairly significant and senior leadership roles and succeeding in those spaces. And so, as hard as it is to see, 2 to 3 people a year leave to other leadership opportunities, is also a point of success, frankly, is, we've set people up for that opportunity. So I think those are the 3 ways we've been able to view our progress through this work.
Oh, thank you, Jason. And just a tiny bit of a segue from what you said, you had the blessing, I guess, of the surveys and the interviews with the research study. So when you mentioned that your view as leadership, especially in the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit area, was not what you'd expected, when you've disaggregated, or I would say maybe triangulated your observations with the surveys, have there been anything else that stood out, like in a positive or a negative way? maybe I should say positive or challenging way?
No, I just no, and well, I think alternatively, people had more confidence. Maybe it's just like my own imposter syndrome or not, but more confidence in the thought of visionary leadership at Rundle than I would have given us credit for. They felt really, really strong in that space. They've obviously got a high degree of confidence in their ability in designing good instruction, and that's not a surprise either. I mean, so I think like that visionary leadership being as strong as it was in FNMI, from start to finish being as weak as it was, were the two primary takeaways that we have, and certainly even in the last iteration of the report, those held true. And so it just further goes to show us how much work we have to do, how much emphasis we have to put in pluralism to make sure that we get to a place where everybody belongs, and we're seeing that implemented.
Thanks. I see David's hand up, and then there's a question in the chat. David, do you want to go ahead, please?
Thanks. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Jason, thanks very much for this. I've got two questions actually. The first one is around the whole idea of every student a leader, which is an excellent approach to take. It gets beyond kids showing up believing that they are simply doing schoolwork for some other purpose, but you're developing character and hopefully building a better future for those students. My first question is, can you briefly speak to a kind of leadership model that you use, the way you organize the school days so that reality takes place? And then I'll ask my second question.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question, David. I think the first thing we do is we have, similar to your schools, I'm sure, but we have homerooms that follow students throughout. What's a little bit unique at Rundle is you've got a grade 7, 8, 9 homeroom teacher who you see start of the day, end of the day. Grade 10, 11, 12 homeroom teachers see start of the day, end of the day. 3 successive years, you see that person twice a day. And the parents get to know that person well as well. The reason I bring that up is that person is largely charged for the character and co-curricular development of every student in their care. So they've got 3 years to develop them through their junior high years, through their senior high years. And embedded in that are, countless leadership kind of workshops throughout. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I mentioned it, is the student ascent. And my view is, it doesn't matter your profession, your work, your place in a school, your place in an organization, everybody leads, can lead, should lead, and followership is part of leadership. And so we've developed a program called The Ascent, as mentioned before, and we have about 20 sessions a year where I'll present 2 or 3 of them as all on some leadership principles. Then we'll have like between 13 and 17 guest speakers come in. And what we want to demonstrate is that leadership lives everywhere. And it's so clear that leadership lives everywhere. So and we've had the Supreme Court Justice Sheila Martin come in and speak, or whether it's an alumni who's leading some kind of student initiative at their university, or a parent who's running a not-for-profit downtown, they come in and basically do an open Q&A with our students and talk about what it looks like to lead. And so we've been fortunate, not dissimilar to the story of Rundle. I mean, I started with 6 students in 2017, and now I've got well over half of the senior high student population enrolled in our program. And the real success of that program, again, back to COVID, is we deliver them on Zoom. They're super flexible. There's no obligation for students to show up. Super, it's easy going. We try to make them extraordinarily high quality and connected, so students feel seen, heard, and valued inside those sessions. And they earn a credential at the end called the Distinction of Leadership. But I think that's actually just window dressing for a lot of it. I think a lot of students really like connecting directly with these people. And again, Zoom just has made it so easy to have access to people. And the number of cold calls I've made to professional athletes, to, like I said, business leaders from across Canada, and tell them I need 45 minutes and it's going to be easy for them and they're going to inspire kids. My return rate on that is incredibly high. It's almost 100%. There's been a couple I still don't have Stephen Harper. So that's actually, I've been working on him, but almost everybody else has returned my call, which is unbelievable. So that's been a part of that process, David, and part of that philosophy.
Yeah, thanks for that. My second question is I'm always curious about the lagging indicator piece. So, you know, we can put targets, processes, put the standards in front of people. I'm curious about what your intentional process is to use adaptive processes based on what the evidence is telling you, whatever that is. Can you speak briefly to that piece?
Well, I think, you know, the FNMI is what I keep coming back to is, and it's slow. Like I think part of the change is understanding that as long as it took us to get here, it's going to take us to get to a new place. And I mean, Rundle ran for 30 years without really talking about FNMI at all. And that's just a sad fact of who we are, maybe our society in general. So when we think about truth and reconciliation, we think about anything in the bucket of pluralism, we know that it's going to take consistent effort, sustained effort over the course of 3 decades to continue forward. So I think it's just a matter of resourcing appropriately and having that continued effort, particularly in the area of pluralism and the coordinator, and letting them know that progress is going to be slow and steady, but slow is probably the leading descriptor there.
Thanks.
Not sure if you can read Lori's question in the chat box, but if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Yeah. So thanks, Lori. Yes is the answer. We see, you know, and I don't know, like, so what I'm trying to get around to is I really value post-secondary education. I value learning quality standards and so on and so forth. I think there's something to that. There's still a place in my mind for local professional development days and large conferences. Absolutely value both of those. But a vision, you know, I put out when the LQS started was that we wanted to go from, I think it was 8% of our teachers would have a master's degree or an LQS certification to 33% by 2025. I'm not going to make that goal, but we dumped PD resources. We allocated PD resources to those 2 initiatives, and we see a lot of teachers stepping into it. And then it's a matter of coaching teachers. Okay, so coaching teachers to lead in 1 of 3 spaces. Okay, and our model is built around this, totally transparent. There's school leadership, there's curricular leadership, and there's teacher leadership. All equally valuable, and not everybody is set for all 3. So building that model and putting it in front of everybody and saying, we value all these leaderships, and here's what they are, and where do you fit? Okay, and then let's design your leadership experience for 1 of those 3. School leadership being principal tracked, curricular leadership being, curriculum leadership, department head, innovation, those, and teacher leadership, which is equally important, is our whole mentorship, teacher development space. And so teachers actually sat down in one of our workshops early on, this has been 2019, and said, you know, my heart is working with other teachers, not in an evaluative way, but in a development way. Okay, now we're into the teacher track. Here are the 5 things you can do to develop yourself in the teacher track. Here are the 5 things you can do to develop yourself in the school leadership track. So we see a lot of teachers pursuing their master's degree, not getting to the 30 or 33, 35% that I kind of hoped for, but that was unrealistic. I know now, but a lot, the continued emphasis in that space. And so, yeah, we're seeing a lot of teachers jumping in on that. Colleen, I see your question. I'll quickly just address that. And I mean, the question is the impact of language bringing standards to life in your school. And I think it's just like, anything, honestly. If you're going to have values at your school, ours are kindness, curiosity, wellness. They pop up in almost every communication I do, any speech I give, anything I write. Inspired minds, unparalleled character, extraordinary community. Those are three of the Rundle bits. But then when we talk at our principals meetings, our internal conversations about leadership, teacher quality standard, my assistant head operations is like a dog on a bone with these things, and he brings it back to the standards every single time, and he makes sure that it's implemented in all of our base documentation, all of our evaluations. Everything that we're bringing forward with our leadership team will be based specifically in the language that we see there, and then it becomes, I suppose, a little bit more subconscious than anything else. And that it's just intentional here, the way we use language and everything, and almost the point of redundancy. Honestly, Colleen, it feels a little boring, a little bit built up, but I think that's just one way to make sure things are implemented properly.
Thank you. We have time for one last question if anybody wants the floor. You can go to the next slide, Claudine, for sure, and we'll put it in the chat. Anyone want the last question, Dr. Rogers, today? I want to give everybody an opportunity.
I do have one just quick question. If that's okay. And it's more around, I think for me, a light bulb moment went off today when you talked about sharing the narrative with the school community. We often think of that, TQS, LQS, and we think of our school community that's in front of us, not necessarily our parent community. And so I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about the impact that perhaps has had on that parent community, and again, that coexisting relationship between the school community.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Crystal. And it's something, it's one of these things I often think about. What's the end result of communication? And the reason I think about it is because we communicate a lot, we rarely hear anything back. So you don't know. You send these things out into the void, and I'm sure you feel that way too. You hit send, you never know how it's landing or where it's going. But what I've noticed, and this is subjective as the day is long, like I can't validate this, but as we talk about leadership more and more and more, I see the stature of our teachers being elevated, and I'm hearing less and less concern from the teacher saying, I was challenged on X, Y, and Z by this parent. How dare they? And like we all have those parents who come in and say, I learned this way my kid learns, so on and so forth. And certainly, I don't know what that's like public versus private, but I can tell you there's a little bit of pressure here from parents for teachers to be the best. Like that's just probably part of the scenario. But over the years, as we've been elevating these teachers in the space of leadership, I'm hearing less and less, whether it's confidence of the teachers saying like, no, I've got this, or it's parents hearing that narrative and saying they've got this, or a combination of both, which is likely the truth, Crystal. I think that's where that narrative is paying off. When you send it into the void, something is happening. And I think we're seeing less and less parent challenge, still challenge us. And I think that's fair, but less of it. I hope that makes sense.
That brings us to the conclusion of this particular session. And I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Jason Rogers for sharing his illustrative case study and all of the learnings attached to that particular study. So thank you so much, Jason. Really lively presentation. And Claudine has provided you the link. We'd really like your feedback on how we hit the mark or how we could improve, as we have one last session and Claudine is already there. And you'll note that it is on May 16th, and we are welcoming Grand Prairie Public School on May 16th. So Dr. Rogers' mail is on the screen for you, as is mine. If you have any follow-up questions, we'd love to work through those questions with you. So thank you so much for the gift of your time this morning. And we hope that you have a super day.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, David.